Hi, everybody. If you want to just grab your seat and get comfortable, thank you guys for coming to have a discussion that I think is an increasingly important one. So most of the thanks go to Jennifer, because I think that's really where it started, right? I mean, I think you're the driving force behind this, so thank you for putting it together. And I'm sure we're going to hear great insights from the panel. And Mr. Ryan getting to play the role of moderator, that's a nice upgrade for you, man. I like it. I think it's good.
I'm working on it.
I think you're going to do a good job. I think it's great. But I think it's not lost on all of you guys why this is really important, and I think that's what's at the foundation of this employee resource group too, right? That it's at the core of it, it's all about diversity, and it's about inclusion, and it's about what we talk about here at the company all the time. And you guys have heard me talk about diversity here all the time. I think it's way past race and gender. I think diversity is about experience, different perspectives, different views of the world, and getting people around who have different opinions. And when you put it all together, I think the recipe adds up to a very inclusive culture that kind of looks after its own and you guys know how sensitive I am to this, because as the parent of a special needs child, you count on people to be very tolerant, right? Otherwise he really is going to have no chance of success. So I think for me, it's rooted in diversity. But then if you look at what's so compelling now, and I'm sure we're going to get some great comments from the panelists, this is just becoming something, unfortunately, we're reading about more and more. Right? Many of you were probably bullied as children. I can remember, when I was a little kid, and I was little, and I can remember delivering newspapers, and there was one kid in the neighborhood who thought it was funny to just try to knock me off my bike on the way to deliver my papers in the morning. And then, I got some interesting advice from my dad on how to deal with bullies, but that's not a subject of today's discussion. We're going to try to keep this constructive and proactive and positive. But he didn't bully me after that anymore, so that was good. But as I said, we're not going to go there. But we're going to read more and more about it, because now it's moving online, and I'm sure some of the panelists are going to talk to you guys about that too. And where it really hits home for us is, if you think about it, the statistics are pretty outrageous that 1 in every 5 or 6 kids thinks they're being bullied, which means they probably are. And turn that percentage up to more than 50% of children on the autistic spectrum get bullied, right? So it's something my wife and I spend a lot of time on, because we realize that the odds are against these kids a lot already, and now you've got 60% of children with autism, being basically everybody's whipping boy at school, because, just for the simple fact that they're different. So I think this couldn't come at a better time. Jennifer, I really thank you for kind of catalyzing this and getting it organized, and I hope you guys have a terrific session today. So I'm going to hand it to you to introduce it, all right? Thanks a lot. Give Jennifer a hand, please.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks, Duncan. Bullying doesn't survive when leaders in our community don't tolerate it. So it follows that your presence and comments here today could not be more valuable to the NYSE Euronext community in making a difference around this issue. Another important fact in the fight against bullying is identifying what we each individually need to do that will help us to grow an atmosphere in all parts of our daily lives that is intolerant of bullying, and especially learn how to cope with its new and perhaps most pernicious form, cyberbullying. Those of us who come from within communities that are considered to be diverse may feel a greater sense of responsibility to give back and become thought leaders in this fight. But just because we happen to be LGBT or Latino, or the parents of a child who is different, doesn't qualify us as experts on anti-bullying when faced with a bullying or cyberbullying situation. That's how this panel came together. NYX Pride and Allies met and agreed that a high priority item to our group was to partner with our peers in diversity, the ERGs, who also would have a strong stake in becoming thought leaders in this area. One of the great outcomes of this collaboration is that we have Eric Ryan here, who is chair of the Black Employees ERG and an expert in communications, where he's worked shaping messages for both internal and external online communities here at NYSE Euronext for 11 years as our moderator. The process also enabled us to see that we shared with all the members of the Diversity Council the aspiration that hosting this event may help not only us, but all of our peers at NYSE Year Next become skilled anti-bullying fighters for our kids, our colleagues, and if necessary, ourselves. So on behalf of myself and my co-chair, Rob Nostro, who wanted to be by my side today but had to do that other thing we do here, which is called work for work, and especially on behalf of, and I want you guys to stand up, Matt Chan and Melissa Burke, who really were the primary organizers and drivers of this panel. And our subject matter experts, our panel here, who are going to help us learn what we need to learn. We've got Amal Sinha, who's on the far left here, is the director of the Suffolk County chapter of the New York Civil Liberties Union. NYCLU works on a number of campaigns and issues, including students' rights. Amal has a law degree from Benjamin Cardozo School of Law and a BA from NYU. His legal experience provides a framework for understanding the legislative backdrop of bullying on campuses and other school settings. Noah Salzman, in the middle here, is a rising college freshman and the vice president of communications of End to Cyberbullying, a youth-driven nonprofit whose goal is to limit and prevent cyberbullying globally. Noah's youth-focused, youth-driven perspective offers insight as to how to protect our youth in the ever-evolving cyber world. Finally, Wes Niemans is education manager of the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project is the nation's leading organization for providing suicide prevention and crisis intervention resources for lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, and questioning youth. Thanks to all of you for being here today. I'm going to turn it over to Eric. We're going to do about 35 minutes of hearing the panel talk, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for everybody on the webcast that's tuning in as well. I'm going to jump right into it because I've had the great fortune to already talk to these guys a little bit, and they have a lot of knowledge to share, a lot of resources to really tell us about, so let's get right into it. If you could, and maybe we'll start with Wes here, tell us a little bit about how you actually identify bullying.
Okay. So at Trevor, we really focus on kind of providing those crisis intervention resources for youth who are either victimized or going through a hard time. As Jennifer said, we really focus on lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning youth, but our services are provided for anyone. And we have a lifeline that's offered 24/7, and in that lifeline, we get calls every single day, over 35,000 calls a year from youth who are just sharing their experiences in school. So I'll speak directly to the LGBTQ perspective. I know my colleagues here will be able to speak to a greater kind of a general population. But something that we encounter with young people who identify as LGBTQ, and even young people who don't identify as LGBTQ. So youth who are maybe, a boy who is in dance or a girl who plays football. Something we hear very, very often is that it's a systematic kind of sense of oppression and intolerance to who they are. 80% of youth who identify as LGBTQ hear negative remarks about their sexual orientation every day in school. 64% of those youth feel unsafe going to school, and about 31% actually miss a day of school per month because they feel unsafe. So for us, we identify bullying and that kind of victimization as that atmosphere of intolerance or unsafety. And so that comes in many forms. I mean, we know that words happen. We know that there's physical violence often against these youth. And we also know that there's just school environments that are not supportive, that aren't providing any sort of kind of support, and aren't really focused on ensuring the safety of all of their students. And so, certainly we know that bullying happens in many forms based on people's appearance, their race, their religion, the kind of clothes that they wear or can afford. But we know that this population of LGBTQ youth, just like special needs youth, are, much more highly victimized in our experience and from, the research that we use. And so I think we take a comprehensive look at bullying, and that it's not just that one interaction between two people. It's actually where the teachers are, what the teachers are saying, what school staff is saying, and what the administration has deemed as appropriate or inappropriate and taking action to prohibit these kinds of.
Sure, sure. And Noah, what's your take on it? I mean, with you guys being much more on the cyber end of things.
Well, since there's this whole confluence of new media technologies, the cyberbullying has developed into something that really seems nonstop. Because of the anonymity that you feel when you're masked behind a computer screen, you feel like you're invincible and that you can post hurtful things on Facebook or on Twitter, and it's okay because nobody is going to hold you liable for your actions. But when it becomes deliberate and repeated, we need to start looking at the situation not just to see who's the bully and who's the victim, but why this negative behavior is even being performed and if there's something at the root of the problem. Because a lot of times we talk about identification of bullying, and it's more difficult for adults to identify bullying now that it's online, because some people did not grow up with these technologies, and also because sometimes kids think, oh, my parents won't really know how to handle this, I'm not going to confide in anybody, I'm just going to let it happen. But when it becomes torment and it becomes scary to turn on your computer, where do you turn next? And a lot of times we see withdrawal from academics or just from interests in school and outside of school. And that sort of link to depression is definitely there. And a lot of that has to do with that repeated, nonstop online flow of information.
Sure, sure. And Amal?
So thank you for having me, first of all, and thank you to the NYSE for having us all. And I pretty much agree with my colleagues here, and I do think that one step back, thinking about what bullying actually is, it's essentially an exploitation of a power imbalance of some sort, right? Whether it's real or perceived, where a majority group or somebody who perceives themselves to have greater power exerts it over a group or an individual that he or she perceives to have lesser power. And I think it's schools' responsibilities and our responsibility as allies to sort of empower the students that are feeling as though they have lesser power than somebody else and make sure that they're able to assert their rights. So it's that creation of a hostile environment that I think really signifies what bullying is.
So let's take a look maybe from the perspective of those that are being bullied first. How do we help them cope with that situation? How do we help them identify behaviors in others that they're seeing and then find the strength within themselves to be able to stand up? I mean, is it information? Is it techniques? How do we start that process? Maybe we'll get a little bit from you first, Amal.
So, I mean, the first and foremost thing that anybody can do to help a student who's being bullied or an individual who's being bullied is to inform them of their rights, right? Because every single person in the United States has rights under the U.S. Constitution, and there are several rights that are special to students in public schools. And students that feel as though they are in control of their own rights, that feel as though they have protections guaranteed to them in the school day, and that are able to assert their rights throughout a school day, are better able to cope with the elements that are affecting them on a daily basis. And if students know and can assert their rights, then it's our obligation as support and as school officials or as parents to help them provide those, or to help the environment provide the protections that the students deserve.
Sure, and Noah, in a world where we have all these digital utilities around us, we have the internet, we have our smartphones, I mean, how do we, keep tabs on those kind of things, in a digital world?
Well, it's definitely harder to track, which is why we focus so much on education, because as Amal was saying, you need to know your rights, but you also need to know that those rights do extend onto your digital life. So the persona that you present online should be pretty reflective of who you are in person. And also one thing that really needs to be emphasized is that your online life, your cyber trail, that's permanent. Just because you post something and later delete it doesn't mean it's not going to be there. It's still going to be there in the database of the company's website, and these things are traceable. So one distinction that we like to make is that you still have your freedom of speech online. You can express opinions freely, but when it becomes defamation, when it becomes false, and when it becomes intentionally hurtful, you need to kind of take a step back and think, well, what would happen if I did this in person? Because a lot of times there's less education on the cyber front because adults, educators, administrators, they feel like it's kind of taboo, so they can kind of neglect it and they can say, oh, that's not within our jurisdiction. But you do have a lot of those rights. Just because it's online doesn't change that fact.
So let's talk a little bit about rights then. I mean, Wes, what kind of places can we go to learn about our rights? And then are there resources at school that we can tap into, government resources? I mean, how do we utilize that?
Well, definitely. I mean, I know that New York State passed the Dignity for All Students Act, and this is really a school safety bill that is designed and enumerates specific classes and types of people that we know and bullying that we know exists in schools based on research. And so I think step one is knowing that under New York State law that's prohibited at this point. And I know that NYCLU is actually working to make teachers and school staff aware of this and its implications. I'm sure I don't want to overstep. I know that
I'm
something
all have
that
at
he's
it,
very
please.
familiar with.
Sure. So the Dignity for All Students Act is a piece of legislation in New York that was passed a couple years ago, and it was implemented in schools last year and was later amended and then is going to be re-implemented in schools this coming school year. And what it does is it hopes to create a sense of civility in the classroom and in the school day. And it does that by trying to create a sense of empathy between peers within the school. And improve school climate for all students across the board. And what I mean by school climate is essentially all elements, all of those moving parts in a school day, including the way the students experience the classroom, the way they experience extracurricular activities, the way they have personal interactions with one another, the way teachers respond to them, and the way the school staff outside of teachers respond to them, and the way the administration views the school day as a whole. So it's all of those moving elements coming together at once. And what the aim of the Dignity for All Students Act is to essentially uplift that school climate, to make sure that students are engaged, to make sure that that students have the best school day possible. And some of the basic requirements of the Dignity Act, if I may, include having the school district come up with policies to prevent and address bullying, having the school district implement training sessions for faculty and for students on diversity and inclusion and the like, coming up with prompt responses to bullying incidents and investigating bullying incidents to determine whether or not something actually happened and to determine whether or not there's a need for a response. And those prompt responses should be more than simply suspending a student, right? They should be reasonably calculated to stop and end or prevent the harassment from occurring in the first place. And it also requires for school districts to collect and report data on bullying to the state. So those are the basic elements of the Dignity for All Students Act. And it also, one thing that I forgot to mention is that it includes a provision for providing for a Dignity Act coordinator, which is a person or group of persons in a school that is sort of the go-to person for all things related to the Dignity Act. So this person can be the person that students feel comfortable with so that they can report incidents of bullying, hopefully confidentially to that individual. That person can be the person that leads up investigations or assigns investigations to make sure that bullying issues are thoroughly investigated and responded to. And that person can be the person that recommends prompt responses to the school district.
Okay, sure. So let's flip it the other way now, and let's talk about bullies themselves. I'm a father of two, and one of my greatest fears is actually not so much that my sons are being bullied, but they may become bullies for some reason that I may not even be able to see or identify. Maybe Noah, if you can talk a little bit about some of the psychology of a bully and how maybe we can deal with that as parents, friends, colleagues.
Well, I think one thing is that culturally we've kind of created this prototype for what a bully is, and for some reason we're always surprised when it's not what we think it would be. And the important thing is for us to take a step back and say that anybody could be a bully and anybody could be a victim, because as I was saying, it is a behavior, not a person. You're not born with the inherent desire to hurt other people. But what we need to do is we need to have open communication with family, administrators, teachers, because a lot of these problems can be stopped if your insecurities can be disclosed to somebody that you trust. Because at the root of bullying often is some insecurity, whether it's about yourself and you want to feel like you can have leverage over a situation, so you try to create a power imbalance, or if it's just that maybe you feel like you can get a rise out of somebody. We need to have open communication, because I know in my own personal experiences, I've been able to speak to my parents about any issues that I might have, And that definitely helps me from acting in a negative way. And that early intervention is so important because now that the internet is available to anybody, a young kid could be a bully. You would be very surprised at some of the instances that I hear where it's like a 5th grader who's bullying younger kids or even kids of his age or older kids. And also we need to get rid of that idea that a bully is a teenager or a middle schooler, because there's bullying in sports with athletes that are older. There's bullying in the workplace. There's bullying everywhere, and we need to stop acting like that's not the case. We need to really discuss it openly and with the desire to change it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, let's talk about how bullying has evolved. And whichever one of you wants to take this first, please jump in. But, you know, with the internet being what it is and so many things changing in our society, how has bullying changed? And how can we help identify those changes and do something about it more quickly?
Well, I guess I'll speak to that. So we used to have what we would call schoolyard bullying, which involved a lot of physical violence, and now a lot of the violence is more emotional. It's emotional pain because when you go on your computer, you want to feel connected. That's the entire purpose of social networking. You want to feel like you can converse freely. But some people feel as though they're trapped by this constant social networking stream and that everybody's always watching. But other people think, well, because I can be anonymous on the internet, I can really act in any way that I'd like. I can post hurtful things and nobody will ever know. So for example, there's a website called Formspring, and Formspring enabled people to ask anonymous questions to another person. But what it turned into is anonymous bashing all the time. And Formspring, the company itself, didn't want to take any responsibility for this because they said, you know, we can't control that. But we need to have that open conversation with companies so that they do know what to do when that happens, and they do know where there is a line between expressing what you want to say and using pejorative labels or really making someone else feel like they're not welcome. And it's not just that we need to tolerate people. We need to make people feel accepted unconditionally, whether or not it's something we're familiar with or not. We need to really be more okay with diversity. We need to start acting like diversity is normal, diversity of sexual orientation, of race, of gender, of interests, because it is normal. And if you have those open conversations, I think it will be a lot clearer that that is normal.
That's an interesting idea, and I want to come back to that in a minute. But Amal, I want to get your thoughts on the evolution of bullying as well.
Well, I think bullying is a lot more public than it used to be, you know, and it's traveled outside of the school day, which I think is important. But one thing I will mention is that students, individuals, all people have First Amendment rights as well, which Noah alluded to earlier, and it's about responsible assertion of those rights and making sure that you're responsibly active on the internet. We don't want to discourage people from expressing their views or their opinions or participating in democracy in any way. But what I think is important to note is that students do have First Amendment rights in the school day and on their computers and at home. But it's the responsible training of what those rights actually mean and how to handle yourself online that is, you know, important to relate to them.
Sure. So I've heard a couple of times this concept of tolerance and acceptance and all the things that I think most of the people, if not everybody in this room, would agree are important things, right? But it almost sounds like there's an undercurrent of something stronger than that you have to actively teach. You have to actively engage your children in learning more about cultures, learning more about sexual orientations, and really creating an environment in your home particularly that really makes those things non-taboo. So Wes, maybe you could give us a couple of ideas on how we can actually start to do that in our homes.
Sure. I mean, I think it's interesting because we're talking about the evolution of bullying. I think everyone, it's no secret to anyone that you know, more and more LGBT people are out and open about their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And so I think that, you know, just in hearing what my colleagues were saying, a large difference is that people are openly disclosing this about themselves now and at younger ages. And, you know, an 11-year-old who comes out, oftentimes, you know, for anyone who's come out of the closet themselves, you know that you have to be the educator. So, you know, many times you're coming out to your family or a friend and they've never met another person who's LGBT, and so you have to be the authority on that. And so to ask that of an 11-year-old is really, really difficult and puts a lot of pressure on that person, that young person, to be the authority on their own sexual orientation when they're just probably trying to figure it out themselves. And so what I think, the word that I feel like is missing here is empathy, and the ability to really empathize with other people who are different than you. I think as a culture, as a society, we, take a few steps forward and maybe a step back or two, but in many ways we've come a long way in being able to empathize with the experience of others. And I think with parents and families especially, is preparing yourself to be able to empathize with a young person who might come out as LGBTQ, whether it's your child or a nephew or a niece or a family friend. It's really, really important that you educate yourself on how to be an empathetic ally to those people, because it's not going to stop. People are going to continue to come out. And so I think empathy, is something at Trevor that we really take very seriously, because what we find is that a lot of these youth are not being listened to. They're not being validated. I think there's a tendency, and I'll speak for myself, as adults, the older you get, to live these experiences and know, oh, it's going to be fine, or you're going to be okay. And what we find so often is that young people just are not being listened to. Their experiences are not being heard. Someone says, I'm being victimized, or I'm being bullied, or they come out of the closet. There's a tendency for us as adults to say, okay, well, here's what you should do. I've got all this for you, rather than just saying, okay, so tell me more about what that's like, and really validating what they're saying, and listening to them actively. And so I think, my suggestion would be to take the responsibility in yourself to learn more about what it means to be LGBTQ, what it doesn't mean, and how you can be an empathetic ally to these people.
So, no, in your experience so far, has it been empathy and education and really just listening are really the best first steps to kind of combating this bullying culture?
That definitely is a huge component of it, especially because in schools, we need to have something that extends beyond the home, where you feel like you go to school and you still are learning empathy. Because there are a lot of practical skills that we teach, but empathy seems a little bit intangible at this point. And one thing that we talk about is that curriculums in schools should really attempt to integrate this cultural diversity learning into the everyday curriculum. So we know that, for example, at my school, we have something called Diversity Day. And it's people of different cultures, different sexual orientations, and they all put on a performance. But the issue with that is that it makes it seem like we need one special day to celebrate diversity, as though those things don't exist through the rest of the school year. And one important thing that I've spoken to my administration about doing is integrate those little aspects into a history class, an English class, a health class, because these things are relevant all the time. So sometimes it's difficult to not perpetuate that ignorance without discussing it. You don't realize sometimes that you're creating stereotypes or that you're becoming closed-minded, because we start viewing things as normal and abnormal. And what we think is atypical, we automatically close ourselves off to. But if in school we act as though diversity is a cornerstone of our educational and social experience, then we'll definitely feel like we're better equipped to handle situations where we may not be comfortable.
Please.
Which, if I may add, I think, hearing your CEO come and share that this is important and this is a priority, I think really sets a huge tone for everyone. And so, often I feel like the conversation is, how can we empower young people to be, to support themselves and to stand up for themselves, which is absolutely a part of it. But it's really helpful, and the message really sticks when it comes from someone on that top level who's saying this is a priority for whatever environment that they're in, and I'm going to see to it that it's taken seriously. That really sets a tone. And so I think that that's another thing to just think about, and it's a really wonderful thing, I think, that tone has been set here as well.
Sure. So, let's extend that further. As CEOs of our own homes, right? Or at least my wife is the CEO of our home. I don't know if I'm the treasurer or something, maybe. But and Amal, maybe I'll pose this to you. What things can we do at home that set that tone, but then extend that to the education experience that they have at school? How do we engage teachers, guidance counselors, the like?
Well, I think the Dignity Act actually provides a great opportunity for students to be more active about their own educational environment, and for parents to be involved as well. One of the things that we recommend to school districts is to involve all of the stakeholders at play into the school day. So whether it's parents, teachers, staff, administrators, students themselves, involve them in the policy making of the school day, involve them in the curricular development of the school day. You know, try to embrace the society around you and bring that into the curriculum. And one plug of our work is that we do help school districts think about ways in which they can integrate some diversity and inclusion lessons into their curricula. So for instance, sex ed is a great opportunity, right? Sex ed is a great opportunity to talk about different sorts of lifestyles and making sure that individuals know that, you know, sex education is not all about one man, one woman, and their kids, right? It could be about a number of different lifestyles, and make that a part of the curricula as though it was normal, right? As though it is normal, and make sure that students realize that that differences are something to be embraced and not something to be alienated.
Sure. Noah, what are your thoughts on curriculum?
Well, if I could just add about the Dignity Act, as a young individual in a room of mainly adults, I urge every adult to learn about the Dignity Act, because I've attended workshops and I've approached my teachers in the beginning of the year and asked them, you know, what do you know about it? Most of them are like, not much really. We know that we have to pay for it, like as a school. And it's a great piece of legislation. It provides a lot of the things that we need in order to incorporate those significant aspects into our curriculum. So if there are adults who are actively seeking that education, including our teachers, administrators, but just any parent of a student, that also sets that tone that people care, and this is really important, and that school climate is extremely significant, not just to the students, but to everybody who's involved in any institution, and as you said, any stakeholder, because parents have a huge stake in their kids' education, but also a huge stake in your kids' well-being. And studies show you're gonna learn better if you feel comfortable in school. You're going to be happier in general. And because of that, we think that everybody should go out and get educated on dignity for all students. And there are so many resources online, whether you wanna attend a workshop or just do some research on your own. That's really important.
So let's talk a little bit about maybe some specific bullying instances. Let's say one of our children or friends or whatever comes to us with a specific situation. You know, Duncan mentioned that his father told him to handle it, you know. I'm sure other parents probably call parents and have a discussion about it. I mean, what's the recommended way of kind of taking that first step? Maybe we'll start with you, Amal.
Well, the first and foremost thing to do is to listen, right? To understand what it is that the student is facing or the individual is facing. There was a research survey done which surveyed about 1,000 kids across the country talking about responses to bullying that they found effective, right? And they gave them a list of responses to bullying, and the students were asked to rank their responses one by one to see, you know, which ones are most effective and which ones are least effective. And they had things in there like suspensions, detentions, mediation, stuff like that. The number one thing that students ranked as number one over and over again was that the teacher listened to me. And the number two thing was teacher followed up with me. So that creation of an environment where students feel empowered by the fact that students are being listened to, that they have individual dignity, is probably the best first step that we can take, right? For actually reporting bullying, I think the Dignity Act provides some guidance on how to report bullying to the Dignity Act coordinator, and which later on goes to the principal and to the superintendent of the school district, and later in the year it will go to the State Department of Education. And I think it's up to the key stakeholders in those environments to make sure that there are prompt and progressive responses to bullying, not just suspending the kids, you know, because we know that studies show that suspending kids doesn't necessarily end bullying, right? Sometimes it aggravates it. And it's definitely a terrible outcome for the student who's being suspended, right? Because studies show that students who are suspended frequently are more likely to drop out of school and thus more likely to get involved in the criminal justice system. So it's very important to note that there are good responses and bad responses, and to understand what best fits in your environment and how we can be progressive and listen to each other and come up with responses together.
Sure. No?
I think there also just really needs to be a very permeable school environment, because we use something called conflict resolution a little bit too often, which is basically where you sit in a room, discuss your problems, and then shake hands and act as though everything's okay. But the issue is that within those four walls, yeah, maybe everything's okay. You know, the bully doesn't get severe consequences, and the victim feels a little bit better about the fact that somebody just shook his hand and promised to not do it again. But when people are young, that doesn't mean that they're actually going to listen. Because I used to lead peer mediation in our middle school, and I would sit with people who would shake hands, but clearly the conflict extended well beyond that environment. And also, since it's cyberbullying, now they could take what they're doing in school and just do it online, thinking that there's not going to be any consequence because it's online now, it's not in school. So if we really listen and show a genuine interest in both the bully and the victim, there's at least a culture that we can stop bullying and that we are going to actually make an effort to follow up and to see, has anything changed? Because if we just have one basic handshake, nothing is going to change. Perhaps one instance of bullying will be a little bit better, or maybe you'll feel a little bit safer knowing that the bully was scared away by an administrator or by someone else, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen again.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about resolution. I mean, Wes, what are your thoughts on once you start the process and a dialogue happens, how do you bring it to a conclusion? Because there's behavioral things on both sides, there's psychological things on both sides. How do you bring closure to an issue?
I mean, that's difficult because I think that there's, you know, I don't think I can provide a blanket statement. I think that it's a highly individualized experience. I think young people are bullied or victimized for many different reasons. I think, you know, what Amal was saying earlier about listening is a really great tactic. I think the next thing that I would say is that we can really empower our youth to be the authority of their own resolution. And so to say, you know, well, how can, as a parent or, you know, as an educator or whatever, to say, how can I support you? So I've heard everything that's going on. What can I do to help you? Because what we find so often, you know, with the youth that we deal with, and LGBTQ youth who are more likely, 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than heterosexual youth, is that what they're lacking is support. And so I think that, you know, in terms of a resolution is, you know, to be realistic. That youth, like those youth who are in that kind of conflict will maybe never be best friends. They might not be friends ever. But that the youth who is victimized is able to find support elsewhere. And so, you know, I think to be realistic is definitely one of them, to ask the youth what they think is the best option in that situation, rather than kind of steamrolling and saying, this is what we're going to do, to say, what kinds of things would you like me to do? Would you like me to see, you know, through? And then also, I think, you know, as I said, to really make sure that we are empowering them to get that support from other people. Youth who have more support in their school, they have more, you know, they can identify more adults to talk to, are generally much better off than youth who can't identify that support, because it really promotes that resiliency. So they have multiple people to go to when issues come up, because we know that issues are going to come up. We know that youth are going to be victimized. It's about them being able to identify avenues of support and safety in their own lives. I think that's a huge thing to keep in mind.
Sure, I see a lot of head nodding going all the way down, so we'll go to you next, Noah. What are your thoughts?
One thing also to notice is that not every bullying instance has a definite resolution. A bully and a victim might reach closure at different times, but also we need to sort of reevaluate. If people are willing to take such extreme lengths, even suicide, because of this, how can we at least get a glimpse into their lives and make them feel as though there is support? So not every person who's victimized is going to seek out support. That's just the nature of the situation. Some people don't feel comfortable. Some people are more introverted. But that's why we need to appeal to a larger group of students. There are students who will be victimized continually, and they'll never tell anybody. Does that mean necessarily that that person's going to attempt suicide? No. But should they at least feel as though if they want to open up, they can? Yes. And if we set that example and we just keep a constant conversation about it, it's a normal thing to talk about. How's the school climate? What's it like in class? What's it like in your extracurriculars? People are more likely to come to you and discuss their problems. And not everyone is going to do it. We need to recognize that, because some people will remain silent out of fear. But we have to say that there is no fear. Just because you're victimized doesn't make you less of a person, doesn't make your life less important than anyone else's. And I think if we continue to emphasize that, people will want to discuss.
Absolutely, Amal.
I agree with both my friends here, and I will say this, that my goal for any sort of civil rights or educational rights problem is to make sure that individuals do not feel victimized or criminalized because of their identity. And that is, a high watermark, but it's a solution to end all problems in the world, right? But I think from the school's perspective, there really shouldn't be one particular resolution, right? There really shouldn't be one magic bullet that solves all problems. Schools should engage in a constant reevaluation of their policies and their practices and their curriculum to make sure that we're creating the best school climate possible. And that, like I said before, should involve all of the key stakeholders. It should involve the students themselves, and it should be engaging, right? The students should be able to take a part in the process.
So one thing I want to make sure I touch on before we go to any questions is cyberbullying and kind of how that's evolved. And I think something that probably scares a lot of us is this concept that our kids can just be out there on the internet. I would imagine the solution is not just to, put parental controls on everything that they do. I'm sure there's some other way that we can kind of engage them and teach them and work with them on it. But I talked to a guy recently that said to me, I didn't learn that my son was dating until I happened to see his Facebook status change. And that right there, I think, is a pretty tremendous disconnect, but not one that's probably uncommon, right? So Noah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, one thing is that everyone is going to have access to the internet on some level at a different point. So I don't think censorship is effective at all, because if your parents are telling you what you can't do rather than what you can do, that automatically ingrains in them this negative idea that there are things in life you can't do and things in life that you can do. And about finding a Facebook status to see that your son or daughter is dating, I think that really all still goes back to that open communication. There are certain kids who might not want to approach their parents about dating, and that's okay. But I think you need to have an established rule. So let's say a kid wants to make a Facebook and he's in 6th grade, but his mom is on Facebook. Are they going to be friends on Facebook? Is she going to be eavesdropping? Are they going to share passwords so that she can read his messages? These things are important conversations to have before you're creating that identity online. Because a lot of times people approach me and they say, well, I feel as though people are infringing upon my rights by being too nosy about my life. Most people don't want to be approached by their dad, oh, I heard you're in a relationship based on your Facebook status. But if you feel like you can have that conversation anyway because you already established rules, then it's just going to create a better environment for the parents and the kid.
Absolutely. Any of you guys have anything else you want to add to that, Amal?
Sure. So it's not as though people are all of a sudden engaging in behavior that they weren't engaging in before, right? For time immemorial, kids have been sexually active, kids have been dating without telling their parents. It's just now that it's a little bit more public and they're tweeting about it, right? So it's important to know that if you do have access to your children's Twitter accounts or you do follow them or whatever, it's important to use those moments where you might see a little bit of discomfort, to use those as an opportunity to engage in a teachable moment. And as as Noah alluded to, it's important to engage your son or daughter in conversations about school climate, about their personal lives if you can. They do have privacy rights, not necessarily against their parents, but they do have privacy rights in their lives, and it's important to understand that we respect each other's privacy, but we also engage in healthy conversations about what it means to come of age, right? So I think that's
interesting. I had absolutely no rights when I lived in my parents' house, just so we know. So as the last word before we go to questions, and I'd like to get this from each one of you guys, what is the one thing that you want everybody in this room to take away from this entire panel in terms of what they can do to help with bullying? We'll start with you, Wes, so we'll just go straight down.
I would just say that, Trevor, we have a lifeline. It's 24/7. We have our target audience, LGBTQ youth, but I can't tell you how many parents we get who call asking for support and how to either support their young person, their child, or someone else in their family. And so, you're not alone, that you are not struggling in this alone. And, whether it's bullying, a young person who's just weighing whether or not to come out, that our lifeline is also there for you as well, and that we can, help hopefully direct you to an organization or just give you the support that you need for you or your child or the young person in your life.
I guess what I would say is that I just want people to be aware of how to engage with their kids, but also to have the desire to engage with them passionately. Try to find out what's going on, because if you set from day one that you guys are going to have an open relationship and you guys are going to be able to discuss these uncomfortable issues, it just makes it a lot smoother to grow up. It makes it a lot easier, because sometimes it's uncomfortable to turn to peers about the problems you have, and sometimes it's uncomfortable to turn to your parents. But if you know about the resources that you have, both as a student or as a parent, as any adult, because all of us have resources and rights, then that just makes the transition through all this discomfort a lot easier.
I would say something that's not dissimilar from what my friend said here, but listen and be engaged, right? So the first and foremost thing, as I mentioned, people want to be listened to, right? They want to be heard. They want to be able to express themselves and their issues with their family members or their support network. So listen to them and be engaged in their environment, be engaged in the school environment. Try to be engaged as much as you can with administrators in the school or teachers, and to the extent that the school allows, be engaged in the policy making of the school. So I think those are two things that are very important to address and create empathy across the board.
Well, thank you guys. I'd like to open it up to you guys for questions. Would love to hear anything that you have. Please.
I actually have two questions. First question is, have there been any studies that show that where there are really good school programs in effect, that the bullying outside of school, either cyber or otherwise, actually decreases, or does it just get shoved off of school property into another venue? Second question, and this is probably more for Amal, given the fact that the First Amendment really does cover a great deal, protect a great deal of very nasty hate speech that is protected speech, what authority do the schools have, particularly if they're public schools, over what happens on the internet?
Okay, maybe we'll start with Amal since she called you out.
I'll take the second question. Schools are a unique place, right? And if there is, I'll go back to the 1960s. There's a case called Tinker v. Des Moines, right, which essentially said that students do not check their First Amendment rights at the schoolhouse gate, right? I think that's a direct quote from the case. And what that means is essentially that students should not be punished for expressing themselves within the schoolhouse, right? So educators should not be punishing students for valid opinions. They should not be punishing students for political opinions. But where that kind of gets really fuzzy is when there is off-campus speech coming into the school day, where there is speech that is hateful coming to, targeting other students within the school. And what Tinker said is that if there is a threat of a material and substantial disruption in the school day, then schools are able to take action, right, of some sort. And there's a line of cases after that sort of narrowed Tinker a little bit. And there's a very recent case called Donninger, where a student was ultimately punished for writing something on her live journal. This was from a few years back when people had live journals, for writing something on her live journal that criticized an administrator, right? And she asked all students in the school district to call and write to the administrator, criticizing him or her for an action that she took while in her capacity as administrator. So students were calling her, students were sending her letters. She actually received a fax from somebody in Saudi Arabia, I think. It was a widely read live journal. But ultimately, the school decided that she could not run for class secretary, all right? Because this was conduct unbecoming of somebody that is seeking to be class secretary. And she sued, and it went all the way up to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Court of Appeals said that was okay, right? and the school court of appeals said that the speech that the student put out there actually disrupted the school day, right? So in far as disallowing the administrator from engaging in her daily activities because she was so overwhelmed by all these messages coming to her in her direction. But what they didn't say was that it's okay to suspend students for this kind of thing, right? They said that the school was within their authority from disallowing her from participating in the class election, right? So it's important to note that distinction, but schools do have authority to take action when speech becomes a material and substantial interference in the functioning of the school.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, just for your first question, I know that it's really difficult because there's a lot of lacking research on school climate, and there's so many different anti-bullying policies that schools have. So they have policies that enumerate what bullying is. They have policies that don't. They have zero tolerance policies. There's so many different kinds of bullying policies that schools and school districts have that it's really difficult to say which ones are most effective and least effective. I think research shows that zero tolerance policies are by and large very ineffective because they set up this bully victim dynamic and don't acknowledge at all the bullying behavior and what that person's experience is. I think the thing to think about is comprehensive anti-bullying policies. So policies that enumerate what is not tolerated in that school, so who you can't bully. And then the other part is creating an atmosphere that is more empathetic, that celebrates diversity, and that really teaches about diverse cultures and diverse ways of life. And that's difficult. That, changes depending on, in the same school district, you could have schools that are doing completely different things. And so I think it's really difficult to say that, by and large, that there's been research that shows that. I think from, anecdotally, from experiences that I've heard, there's very few schools that are implementing all of those things at once. But we know that youth who feel safer at school do better by and large, in and outside of school, because they have that support, they're doing well in their classes, and that really is what promotes that resiliency, because whether or not they're getting bullied off campus or not, they're able to be resilient in that because they are doing okay in school. They have that safe space. I don't know if anyone.
If I could just add to that, one thing is that I'm more of an advocate, rather than saying we're going to have a zero tolerance policy, have a 100% reaction policy. Kids want to know that issues will be dealt with and they'll be responded to, but zero tolerance makes it seem like you're a bad person and one action defines your entire existence. So you feel as though if you did one thing wrong, automatically you're going to be suspended. But how is that effective if you're going to spend a few days at home? Nothing really changed about your behavior. You can't force somebody to change. But if you empower people and make them believe that they can change themselves by reacting to them in a way that will engage productive conversation, then they're more likely to want to change. And what I've noticed over time in school administrations and studies have shown that when people feel as though they're in charge of their change, they are a lot happier and a lot more willing to make adaptations in their behavior and in their lifestyle in general.
One thing I'll add to everything here is that I would highly recommend that folks go online and search for Buffalo School District's most recent amendments to their school code of conduct, because they just revamped their entire code of conduct because there was a student a few years ago who was suspended for loitering in the school and when he was walking in about the halls between classes. That student left school that day because according to Buffalo's previous code of conduct, you had to leave school immediately if you were suspended. He left school, was waiting by a bus stop, and was shot and killed in a drive-by shooting. And they decided, the community got very upset about this and said that if this student was not punished, if this student was allowed to stay in school, this wouldn't have happened, right? So Buffalo School District completely revamped their code of conduct, and it was just recently passed, I think last week, by the city council, and it sets up a progressive system of discipline, right? So minor violations like loitering, like dress code, and disorderly conduct or disruptive behavior are not met with suspensions right away, right? So there are very few First of all, there are no zero tolerance policies within the school code now, and there are very few violations that result in suspension automatically. There are some violations that require some sort of previous intervention, as bad as these violations might be, to sort of get at the core of what the problem is before you do any sort of exclusionary discipline. So I would recommend folks take a look at that school code of conduct, because I really do think that it can serve as a model for other codes of conduct throughout the state.
Wow, thank you. We probably got time for maybe one or two more questions.
This last conversation has been a really terrific segue into the query that I have. I couldn't agree with you more that I think engagement and a real open line of communication are very important, and taking a reactive approach to behavior, as well as, you know, staying away from a zero tolerance policy is most productive in dealing with all of these issues. I'm curious to know whether or not there have been any studies that have examined where bullying can evolve from, whether or not there are any victims of bullying who themselves have evolved to become become bullies themselves, and if in fact there have ever been substance abuse problems that have evolved with that. I've been enlightened recently by behavior that I've been exposed to that leads me to believe that there could be a very interesting correlation between people who've experienced bullying in their youth, who then evolve into being substance abusers, who then, in the context of that problem, become bulliers themselves. And I'm curious to know where we stand in the science and the studies and the evaluations of these problems and how we address them, so that we can maybe take a deeper dive into what the context is here and where it can go to and how we can address these issues.
I can respond to the first part of that if somebody wants to discuss the substance abuse issue after. Well, it's very different and difficult to quantify bullying data, so a lot of the studies are very difficult, and a lot of them are unclear and ambiguous. But one thing that has been revealed is a lot of bullying that occurs in college, later it comes out that the person who bullied was actually a victim. So for example, the Rutgers student Tyler Clementi, who committed suicide because somebody had exposed his sexual orientation by posting a video online, it came out later that the bully in that situation might have been victimized earlier in his childhood, and it's sort of used as a revenge tactic, and it's like, I was victimized and I know what it feels like, so now I want to inflict that pain on somebody else. But if we try to look at it from a totally different perspective, like you were victimized, but then it got better and you learned how to deal with it, and the bully faced some sort of consequence, then a person is less likely to seek that revenge. They're not going to want vengeance on somebody else because they know that they were able to cope with the problem and they learned from it. So if we make every bullying instance an opportunity to learn, people are going to be less likely to retaliate, whether that means victimizing somebody else or becoming self-destructive.
And just very quickly, I know we shared that it's really about a power dynamic, and so we know at Trevor, LGBTQ youth who are victimized in school are much more likely to go online and victimize others online. And that's, I think, clearly makes that case, that it's a power dynamic. They don't have power in their lives at school. Anonymously online, they can regain that sense of power. To speak to your second point about substance abuse, we do know that bullying and victimization leads to negative mental health outcomes. And so, you know, if someone is highly victimized in school, they're more likely to exhibit symptoms of depression. We know that people who have symptoms of depression are more likely to try substance abuse or to engage in substance abuse behaviors. So I think it kind of creates this line, and I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head in identifying that absolutely, that intervention is key early on, because the longer that bullying lasts, the more likely someone is to become depressed. And we know that when someone's is suffering from depression, and the longer that they've been suffering from depression, the more likely they are to turn to alcohol or drugs or attempt suicide.
Sure.
The-
Amal, anything
to
to add?
just go a little further, though, what kinds of programs are there to sort of address those issues in the context of, you know, how we recognize bullying, and then is there a solution? Is there something that we can do to try to help these individuals? Do your programs offer that kind of service?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the key is intervention. The key is a teacher standing up in a classroom and saying, no one can say that's so gay in this classroom. I'm not going to tolerate it. And that creates a safe place. And so the more spaces that a young person feels safe, the less likely they are to be victimized, and the more likely they are to have that support. We know that youth who can identify one supportive adult in their environment are 30% less likely to attempt suicide than youth who cannot. So really, I mean, I can't say it enough. That intervention is key. Someone standing up and saying this is not acceptable is really the first and foremost thing to do. And then to let them know that there is support. So whether they can't get that support from their family, from their school, you know, that we are there to listen, and that, you know, there are mental health organizations that are there to listen. I think, you know, mental health is somewhat finally a conversation that's really being taken seriously in our country, and I think that that's a really good thing, to let them know that therapy is quite all right. It's a great, you know, if you had a broken bone, you'd go to a doctor to see it. If you had a broken mood, why don't we go to a doctor to fix that as well?
It's a really
Thank
interesting
you.
way to put it. Amal, you had anything to add?
Yeah, so very briefly, you know, I don't have any empirical data, but there are stories that we get on a constant basis. To speak to your point about victims becoming bullies themselves, there are stories that we get of students who are victimized throughout for maybe years, right, and throughout their educational careers, who then take some sort of retaliatory action, right, who might engage in violence or you know, get into a fight with one of their bullies, or you know, say something very nasty to somebody who might be bullied online or something like that. And they are the ones who then get suspended or face the consequences of their action because, you know, and they only acted because their bullying was going unaddressed for so many years or for so long of a time. So it's important to know that it's necessary for us to intervene at the first sign of bullying to make sure that the school climate is improved so that bullying doesn't continue, or if it does continue, that the student knows that there is somebody out there listening to them, because we don't want to create a situation where somebody reacts violently or irrationally and then is subsequently punished, either suspended or expelled, which would do the exact opposite of what we want to do. It would create more hostility for that individual. It would, you know, their likelihood of being involved in the criminal justice system goes up, and I don't doubt that their likelihood of being substance abusers goes up as well.
Okay, I think we had one more. Yep, we'll take that last
Yeah,
one.
well, actually, you just touched on one of my questions about bullies having the tables turned on them, because I was bullied as a kid, but I turned it around, much like Duncan probably did, and I ended up being a karate instructor for the last 20 years. And the biggest problem I had with kids coming to my class is that they would be bullied relentlessly for years and years and years. No one would do anything about it because it was down to the parents' education of who the kids' parents were. And when the kid finally snapped and did something in retaliation, which is, to be honest, I applaud if it gets to that level, that person themselves are punished more harshly than the bully would have been in any case. And what it makes people do is, well, if I can't retaliate, if no one's listening to me, I've got nowhere else to turn. So that's an important thing I think people need to look at, that there's not a cookie cutter kind of solution to all these things. And, you know, the way I got over my bullying, the way Duncan got over his bullying, was one which, you know, isn't something that everyone should do, but it worked, and it worked very effectively, and it never happened again. I think the bigger social problem, especially with LGBT the community, is that I was at a wedding a couple of weeks ago, and one of my friends got married, and my two friends are married, and they're both gay, and the couple sitting next to them pointed to them and said to their son, "You see, that's not normal." And when the son said why, he said, "Well, they can't get married in our state." So all of a sudden society's saying that they're not normal. So when the kids are in school, they're saying, well, obviously they're not normal, so I've got grounds to kind of push them out. So no matter what the school says, no matter what the parents say, the government is saying, no, they're not normal. So that's a bigger issue. And I don't know how you can get over that because it stems from the parents. And I really do believe that. And the final question I was going to ask is, when you're talking about educating kids, I would have thought the most easiest thing to do with the cyberbullying was to have a social media one-on-one lesson for kids on how to use their privacy settings, how to block people. Because as far as posting on a Facebook page, if I'm not your friend and I blocked you, you can't touch my page. It won't stop the problem, it won't solve the problem, but it will alleviate some of the problems. So when that kid goes home to check his Facebook page, he's not then met with a barrage of hateful, nasty messages. So having schools proactively teach kids not how to use social media, but how to protect themselves, I think that would be an amazing first step.
Revolutionary. Yeah, we teach them how to protect themselves in every other aspect of life. I don't know that I've heard that they're doing.
But if they're learning to drive a car, they have special driving instructions. They have videos on how to protect themselves, how to protect other people. But surely, if they're allowed to use social media in school, why shouldn't they be taught how to protect themselves? And that's my biggest issue.
Of course, it's difficult to implement school policy that would force schools into having something like that, but I know organizations such as ours hold workshops, and the workshops can be attended by either parents. They're open workshops, but we encourage parents and their kids to come together to learn about social media so that they can kind of take that really comprehensive approach, and also they know how to protect themselves, but they know what negative behaviors are online. Because there is a fine line between teasing someone online and actually bullying somebody, and if that line is recognized, then people are more likely to be cautious about their behavior. But one other point that you made that I want to speak to is that in the past with schoolyard bullying, often violence as a form of retaliation was effective because somebody was afraid. But now that there's cyberbullying, just because there's violence involved doesn't mean that the bullying is going to stop. Perhaps in school it will stop, but online it may continue. And that's why being violent and just getting into a fight isn't effective anymore, because some people are just not going to respond to that, and also that might result in suspension for both people. And when both people are suspended, they feel like they're not being heard, they're not cared about, they're bad people, so they might engage in that negative behavior all the time. So I think it's really important to say, in this day and age, that's really not an effective response to bullying at all.
So first of all, I'm very impressed by NOAA and your organization. I think that the workshops that they provide are tremendous, and at such a young age too. But what I will add to that, the point that you made about your friend's wedding, government rhetoric really does matter, right? And power holders' rhetoric really does matter. And in a lot of societies and governments across the United States, there's a lot of hate, right? And there's a lot of hate coming from the top, and it's perpetuating down to the people. And I think it's very important to note that, when people get up, and say something to the public that is dicey or divisive in any way, it's definitely going to invade the minds of the people in society, and people are going to react because of it. And that happened in Suffolk County, where I work, a couple of years ago, when the county executive at the time, Steve Levy, he was running on anti-immigrant platforms. He was basically getting up on stage saying things like, we need to take back our jobs from those illegals. He would say things that were really targeting Latino day laborers, and not being shy about it at all. And what ended up happening was that there were these kids in Suffolk County that heard this rhetoric, that heard their parents talk about it, and went on this rampage that they called beaner hopping, where they would go finding people that were perceived to be Mexican undocumented immigrants and attack them in various ways. And one of these attacks led to the death of Marcelo Lucero, who is an Ecuadorian immigrant, and he was stabbed fatally by some of these kids. And the kids, when they were questioned, they didn't even blink an eye, and they said, "Oh, we don't really do this that often, only about once a week." And it was totally ridiculous, and this is documented and everything. And it can be directly sort of traced to this government rhetoric that's coming down. And there are lawmakers on the local level that were saying things like, if I see day laborers gathering on my street, I'm going to go out there with a shotgun. You know, and these are elected officials saying these things. If elected officials are saying these things, then what's really invading the minds of the public? So it's really important to note that we should be holding our government officials accountable for their words, because it really does matter. And it's important to note that, you know, if we can hold government officials accountable to be inclusive, to be embracing of diversity and changing societies, then that will sort of play into how we treat each other in our daily lives and how schools treat us when we are within the classroom.
If I could just add something very briefly. Also, 10 years ago, the word of the decade was bystander, that everyone needs to be a bystander. But because we know government rhetoric is so powerful, it's more important to be an upstander, to be an active citizen, and to be educated in all different areas, but also if you hear a government official saying something that you believe is either false or might negatively impact people, you need to feel as though it's your obligation to speak to that point, because dissent is an important part of democracy, of course, but there's a difference between disagreeing with opinion and disagreeing with fact. And sometimes facts are thrown around so arbitrarily, and we just believe them because somebody has power and they're telling us that. But if we have a more informed citizenry, people are going to know what's true, and they're going to be able to discern what is good and what is bad.
Well, listen, I want to thank all you guys for coming. I mean, your insights and expertise here are invaluable to us. So on behalf of all my colleagues, I'd like to thank you guys. Thank you. And I'd also like to thank the Diversity Council, NYX Pride, and allies, and you guys, the NYX community, for coming out and having this discussion and being a part of it. Thank you.